Another one of the updates in the latest software is the ability to do a split Satin with your text segments, and that is going to give you a lot more options, especially with your large size text. And essentially what we're talking about is when you select a text segment, there is now a tab in the properties box called the split tab. And in here you can choose to add a middle split, absolute split, a percentage split, or a random split to your letters, and then you get to set kind of like a minimum and a maximum stitch range, and then when your letters get longer than your maximum range, then they'll start to split. And so if I do it at 6 and 2, we might not see any splitting because none of the stitches are that long. Maybe there's just a little bit happening in this area right here, but not. So that would be where my stitches are going longer than the 6 stitch length like that. And so essentially that's how it works. If you come in here and say, well, maybe do 8, then it might not split any of them because they were longer than 6 but not longer than 8, and so, or if you turn that number down, and you can kind of have fun with it and maybe do a middle split for anything longer than 3 and say apply, and now it'll kind of like do a split through almost all of it. And so you can adjust and play with those numbers for the splitting. So this would be an alternative to in the past when we didn't have this option and the text became too long, and then we would probably have ended up just going to our kind of fill tab and changing it to a pattern fill. And you can still do that absolutely too. It's just when you go to a pattern fill, it's a lot more stitches, and it's also kind of not as dimensional as when you do a satin fill. And so really, as long as the stitches don't get too long, we like to do the satin fill. And so we'll leave our stitching set on a satin fill instead of a pattern fill. And it'll be, like I said, a lot less numbers of stitches. And then if you want to introduce a split and say, only anything that's longer than a certain length. And so that can really help you, especially because, and let's just open up a new segment here and start a new text segment, because text normally works pretty well as long as you stick to the default sizes. The default size for this is 0.79 of an inch. And if I click on the little question mark here, it tells me that its suggested range is kind of from 0.39 of an inch to 1.18 of an inch. So the reason for that is if I make this 3 inches, some of the stitches will be just really long and it's almost like they're missing. And they're not technically missing. If you turn off 3D, you can see the software's totally prepared to put them all in, but they're so long that the typical home sewing machine will recognize that as an area to trim, and it doesn't sew it. And even if it was kind of like an in-between size, where, okay, still parts of it are too long for my machine to sew. This is the time when maybe a split satin would be an alternative to a pattern fill. And so you come to your options and you turn on to do like a middle split, and you say anything that's longer than 4 millimeters wide, split it down the middle. And so it does kind of like a neat pattern like that. Or you go, I'm okay with them being split, but I'm going to do a randomized split so it's less of a defined line where it splits it, but I'm not going to split as much of it. I'll only split when it gets longer, like longer than 7 millimeters long or 8 or something like that. And so some areas like this might not get split at all, but then other areas do get split, but they get done as a satin split. And so that is a new ability that we didn't always have in our text segments. And so that is something that has been added to the text segments, is the ability to add in the split satin control. And so we hope you enjoy this and, of course, all of the updates in the latest version of the Floriani software.